Hey guys, this is Yoda. In this video, we'll go over how all the tanks feel on PTR. In my personal opinion, keep in mind that I'm very biased towards Prot Paladin. A lot of people have been asking me, hey Yoda, what's the meta tank for next season? What should I start gearing? What's the meta tank? What's the meta? What do you think will be the strongest tank for next season? Well, the answer is a lot of tanks are good at different things, and it's really hard to tell right now what is actually going to be the most important thing to be good at for next season. I made these like categories that tanks can be good at that I find to be relatively important. For your tank to be useful in the key and to be quote unquote meta. And I weighted them all. We kind of did this with chat. Some things were disagreed with. Some things are definitely dependent on player skill. So all of these rankings are assuming that like the person piloting the class is literally the best person ever to play the class, especially Paladin. All right, so stability, we'll go over the categories first. Stability, this is like how likely is it that your tank just fucking dies? Like uncarryable by the healer. There's nothing that the healer could do, nothing your group could do. Your tank just died because his class sucks. I would say VDH is an 8. It's very, very tanky. However, obviously, as we saw in Season 2, there are situations where you just put up Sigil Flame and Demon Spikes, and then the mobs just don't get parried and you die. This has happened many times in Season 2, and I find that it will be quite likely to happen in the next season as well. I give VDH an 8. It's very tanky, don't get me wrong, but certain things are very hard for it to deal with. Like, things that spawn all at once, for instance, in streets, like, a lot of tanks have trouble with this. You do the pull with the market, and then like 3 packs of mob spawn, there's 4 strong arms, 2 big guys, and they're all doing tank busters on you right on pull. VDH is not that good against that kind of thing. So, or for instance, Halls of Atonement, I think this is getting nerfed, but you just pull the pack and there's 3 million bears hitting you and you can't drop your bleeds, bang, you die to one shot. So how much counterplay you have to the situations and how likely you are to get one shot is the stability column. So I gave VDH an 8. Prot Pally, a lot of people may disagree with me, but I gave it an 8 as well. In my opinion, Prot Pally is just as tanky as VDH. It just can't really heal itself as well. But it is very dependent on you playing extremely well. You need to have a cooldown for everything that you need a cooldown for. You need to not waste cooldowns as a result. Probably need to start calling for healer externals at a certain point, etc. Pally is also somewhat reliant on parry. In terms of just purely tanking melees, it is probably not as good as a lot of tanks on the list, but Blizzard has changed the game in the current season. I would say a lot of the difficulty that tanks are presented with is not from pure melees, it's from like debuffs associated with the melees or bolts that are hitting you or certain other things like magical tank hits. And Pally is very good against those types of things. So the fact that it has counterplay against pretty much every type of damage is the reason I give Pally an 8. Obviously, if your play is not up to standard, then you're gonna be looking really squishy on the Prot Paladin. But this is assuming that it is piloted by someone really good at the class. Prot Warrior I gave a 6 for stability. I'd say Prot Warrior, after the recent dungeon pool, is kind of down bad. Prot Warrior's 3 biggest weaknesses, I would say, especially after Spellblock is gone, are number 1, strong magical hits. Number 2, magical hits that are associated with melees, which make it so that your block is ineffective. I guess 4 things actually. So 1, strong magical hits that are unavoidable. 2, magical hits that are associated with melees. For instance, in Tazavesh Streets, like the maces, the mace buff that the mobs get, or some other mobs have like some other mace. There's like multiple mobs with maces that are magical in Streets. Mobs that apply a debuff with melees. For instance, the dogs in Halls of Atonement, like the Shadow Walkers in Dawnbreaker, Tainted Slash, I guess is technically not a melee. But mobs that apply stacking debuffs with melees, Warrior is traditionally bad against because your main form of mitigation against melee hits is block instead of parry. So everything that can stack up stacks up way faster on Warrior than most other tanks. And also there's kickable bolts. Warrior is like okay against those because you have AoE kick, but like having to call in a stop rotation for yourself is something that a lot of other tanks simply do not have to do. So I give Warrior a 6 in stability. I would say this is actually one of its biggest weaknesses. The fact that the dungeon pool just offers so many random stacking debuffs, magic hits, etc. Things that Prot Warrior is traditionally not good against. Bear, I gave an 8 for stability. I think Bear is actually extremely tanky. Not that anyone has actually ever seen a Bear on PTR since it's so boring to play, in my opinion. But it is very tanky, especially if you play double survival instincts. You have extremely high uptime on your defensives. A lot of times bolts can just go through and you're fine. Magical hits, it's very easy to have a cooldown every time since Bark is such a low cooldown. So I gave Bear an 8 stability. This could easily, of all the tanks, I would say these numbers are the most likely to be wrong because I have not seen anyone play Bear on PTR. I'm just gauging it kind of from Season 2 since it's not really changing that much. Brew, I gave a 9 for stability. I think Brew is actually probably the quote-unquote tankiest tank in the game on current PTR. The rework has given them extremely smooth damage intake. They have counterplay against every type of damage since they have stagger, they have shield, they have quote-unquote Death Strike type effect with Purifying Brew, they have like Ignore Pain from Celestial Infusion or a similar effect. They have very strong active mitigation, very strong cooldowns. The cooldowns are kind of long, but I feel like their active mitigation and self-healing makes up for it, so they're very strong against pretty much every type of damage. So that's why I give Brew a 9, which indicates that they are actually the tankiest tank in the game on the PTR, in my opinion. Blood Decay, unfortunately, as everyone knows, kind of suffers from the key level. If you are playing low keys, Blood Decay feels completely immortal because, you know, you have self-sustain, so even if everyone else dies, it doesn't really matter, you can still live through. You are very, very tanky against certain things like magical hits. However, you know, Blood Decay's main weakness is, and has always been, a lot of melees at the same time, sometimes by small mobs, sometimes by medium mobs, whatever, just a bunch of melees hitting you. Blood Decay's cooldowns are extremely long, even as Deathbringer. Your Lichborn is 1 minute 30, Icebound is 2 minutes, and those are your only real cooldowns. Like, you have Dancing Rune Weapon and Damp Blood, but those are going to have gaps, and, you know, in those gaps, if you have nothing, it's gonna suck, especially in lower keys. I would say Blood Decay, when played well, can survive the keys that are like 1 to 2 key levels lower than the top keys, but Blood Decay is definitely known for its instability against certain types of hits, which is, you know, mass melees usually, but randomly some other things can also be dangerous, so we're giving it a 5 for stability. I would say if you drop the key level by 2, suddenly Blood Decay stability is like perfectly fine, like an 8, and self-sustain, which we'll get to next, is obviously a 10. Stability, I would say, is the most important weight for a tank because if your tank randomly dies, then the run is just over. So I would say this is the most important. I gave it a 1.5. Could very easily be 2. The most subjective thing, I would say, of all these things is how important every category is, because no one really knows, right? Like, if this dungeon pool is just super easy for tanks, then suddenly stability doesn't matter. If your healer is really busy healing other people and they can't heal a tank, suddenly self-sustain is important. If your group gets stuck because no healer can heal Swamp Face or Big Mama, then, you know, group survivability util is now the most important thing. If you're supposed to pull like 3 million casters, then suddenly stopping enemies is more important. So I would say all of these weights are extremely subjective. No one really knows what's going to be most important, but this is trying to just giving you an idea of how I think about them and which tanks are best at what. Anyway, sorry for the caveats. So for self-sustain, VDH is definitely a 10. You can play without a healer in pretty much every key. In fact, basically you only ask healer for external and that's it. That's basically it for DH. Valley, on the other hand, definitely has one of the lowest self-sustain in the game right now. As Lightsmith, which I think is better than Templar, you do have a decent amount more because your weapons heal you. Like when you have a Sacred Weapon out, your Word of Glory hits harder. Much lower cooldown on land hands and more Shining Light procs. Say probably self-sustain is good would definitely be a lie. You are pretty reliant on having a competent healer. And also you do have gaps in your like cooldown rotation, so having a healer with an external is pretty important too. So I give Paladin a 5 in self-sustain. Fortunately, I would say the healers that are looking strong this season are all capable of healing the tank. Pretty much all of them do really good healing. So that is a plus. Warrior, I give it 6 for self-sustain. So far, the Fueled by Violence build for for Colossus has been nerfed pretty significantly. Fueled by Violence is healing for like maybe 50 to 60% of what it was on like when it first came out, when it first got reworked. So I even think most people are probably going to play Mountain Thane. So I would say Prot Warrior is probably at about a 6. Self-sustain wise, you definitely need a healer to heal you, but you can heal yourself as well. But yeah, I would say probably Prot Warrior is at a 6 if Pally's at a 5. Bear, I would put it a 7 for self-sustain. Frenzied Regen, extremely strong. Lunar Beam, extremely strong. You definitely do feel if your healer is paying attention to you. But you definitely can also heal yourself. Like in all those stress tests, quote unquote, Bear was competitive with Blood Decay and BDH, so I would say it's very high on the list for self-sustain. Brew is kind of weird to say quote unquote self-sustain. Your self-sustain, I would say you are somewhat reliant on a healer, but you also can heal yourself a lot. And having your healer doesn't really need to pay attention to you, they just need to be like connected to the game. Like if your priest has atonement on you, your druid has like random hots, if beacon from Pally, your shaman has like healing rain down, like very, very minimal amount of healing is enough to keep her going. It's just that you do need that very minimal amount. So I give Brew an 8 in self-sustain, especially with the Newzow's Resolve talent actually working. It feels very, very smooth. You have a lot of agency of your own survivability, which I would say Brew is actually, as I mentioned before, the tankiest tank right now on the PTR. It is extremely tanky. Self-sustain, blood obviously gets a 10. Don't really need a healer for anything, so yeah. I would say the self-sustain weight for tanks is at 0.5 right now because the healers that are strong are able to heal the tank basically for free, which is Resto Druid, which is splashing healing on everyone, and Disc Priest, which is healing with Atonement. If there is significant healer bouncing, this could easily change, and self-sustain could suddenly become more important, which would be really bad for Prot Pally, really good for DH, Blood Decay, and Brew, in my opinion. Maybe not Blood Decay. Really good for Brew, though, and VDH. Alright, Group Survivability Utility. So this is how much your tank is able to help the group stay alive on hard healer checks. For instance, Priory on the Lust Pull, Captain Dalcry, or the mini boss at the end that you fire before the boss that's pulsing damage on everyone, or like Floodgate, Swamp Face, or Big Mama, or you know, any heal check in the game. Basically, having this tank in your group makes it easier or harder for your healer. So VDH I gave a 5. You know, you don't really need any healing, but you're not really that useful outside of like Darkness, which is a 3-minute cooldown. I gave it a 5. It's like pretty average for a tank. Prot Pally I gave a 10. This is definitely where Prot Pally really shines. You have 1-minute sack, you have short CD lay on hands, you have Spell Ward, extremely unique things that no other tank has access to. Also, in particular this season with the Lightsmith tier set, you're actually dishing out random shields like at a very high frequency. So I would say Group Survivability Prot Paladin is extremely strong. Definitely the main strength for Prot Paladin is that if you will run into healer checks like 2 to 3, like I want to say 1.5 to 2 key levels above where you would run into them as another tank. Prot Warrior we're given a 3 here. You have Rally when talented, and Rally is complete dog shit, so it's basically completely useless. On top of that, you are in a lot of these fights, you are taking healing from the healer. They have to help you survive. You can't survive on your own. For instance, on Swamp Face, you basically need to be healed by your healer, and healers really do not want to be healing the tank on Swamp Face, so we're given probably a very low ranking here. In fact, 3 is probably too high, to be honest. But anyway, Bear, you know, you can usually take care of yourself on those bosses, but outside of like Dream of Cenarius, which most people don't play, you're kind of useless in these situations. You have Mark of the Wild, but usually that's covered anyway, so we're giving it a 2.5. And Brew, I think Brew is honestly too low. 2 is probably too low. I think Brew could be at a 3 for this. You have Vivify. You usually don't need to be helped by the healer on all these bosses. You need like some amount of, very small amount of healing, but I think you could help more than you need help with Vivify. Blood Decay we're given a 6.5. I would say it's the only character that's even close to Prot Paladin. You have 3-minute AMZ, unfortunately it's nerfed 3-minute. It was 1.5 before, which was very, very strong. But 3-minute AMZ is not nearly as good. The only reason I would say it's 6.5 is that a lot of mechanics can be immuned by AMS. For instance, in Priory, the second boss, you can make it way easier for the group with AMS. Some other bosses are made way easier by grip too, so we're giving it a 6.5. Could easily be lower than that. But yeah, weight, I'd say it's 0.8 right now since the healers are relatively strong. But it really kind of also depends on what DPS are meta. For instance, if a shaman DPS is meta, then suddenly like Paladin 1-minute sack is extremely valuable. And it really depends also on the dungeon tuning. Like if the dungeons are harder to survive than they are to time, then suddenly group survivability till stonks like skyrocket. Whereas if you have infinite time in the dungeon, whereas if you are running out of time in the dungeon, sorry, you don't have infinite time, and the dungeon is like tight on the timer, then this doesn't matter as much because you'll run into the DPS check before you run into the utility check or the survivability check. All right, stopping enemies. So this is like, you know, your grip, your AoE stops, your single stops. What can your tank do to actually stop the mobs from getting their cast off? VDH, we're given at 9. You know, Grip Beam and a Silent Sigil, very good. The only thing I would say is that VDH has extremely long cooldowns on its AoE stops. And its single stop for that matter, which is Imprison, 45 seconds. Chaos Nova is 40, which is pretty nice, but the rest of them are like 1 minute 30, 1 minute, 2 minutes, etc. So it has a lot of tools, but they're very long cooldown, so I give it a 9. Prot Pally can be very useful and can sometimes not be useful if there's like 2 to 3 casters. Divine Toll plus Avenger's Shield is extremely strong at soloing stuff, plus you have 30-second Hodge, and your AoE stuff, Blinding Light. Depending on the number of casters, it can be better or worse than BDH, so I gave it a 9 as well. Prot Warrior, we're given the full 10. In my opinion, Prot Warrior is the best at stopping a lot of casts. You have very low CD Shockwave, especially if you have Colossus, which you might not in the next patch. You have 2 single stuns with Shockwave and Shield Charge. You have Fear if you play Mountain Thane or some Colossus builds. And you also have AoE Kick, which is the longest silence now in the game, other than Beam, I guess, but it's longer than Silent Sigil for sure. And it also syncs casts very well, so I would say Prot Warrior is a 10 in stopping enemies. Bear, it's kind of just useless. It has the Druid stops, you know, Typhoon and Caproar, and that's it. What Druid stops are usually covered anyway. Brew, we're given a 5 since Monk Util is kind of unique. Most groups, if you're playing Brew, like most groups don't have a Monk if that play with a Brew, so, or that would have been considering Brew, I guess. So you have Sweep, Ring of Peace, and Para, which are like lower cooldowns than Bear, I guess. And it's 3 stops instead of 2, so I gave it a 5. So you're still not that useful in AoE stops, but you know, it's there. Blood Decay I gave a 7. I think the single stops that Blood Decay has is extremely strong. With Death Grip, very low cooldown, 15 seconds, and Asphyxiate, 45-second cooldown. And you do also have Sleet, and you have low cooldown Kick. Your Kick is 12 seconds. I gave Blood Decay a 7. I think when played perfectly, Blood Decay is extremely strong. It's stopping enemies from getting casts off. Obviously, you need to actually push those buttons for it to work, but yeah. I gave this category a 1. I think a lot of plugging is just stopping important enemy casts from going off. For instance, like Arcara, if Alarm Shield goes off, it's just over. If people get bolted over and over, it's over. In Priory, if one both goes off, then someone's probably dead. I think this category is very important, so I gave it the full 1 weight. Damage contribution, I consider to be not as important because tank damage is just so low right now. Most of the damage done is going to be by your DPS, unfortunately. But I'm also, for the record, I'm also counting raid buffs in here with your normal comp. So people that don't have raid buffs like Paladin and Blood Decay are very, very low on the damage contribution. VDH I gave a 7.5. Your personal damage is not that good, but the profile is very good since you're all funnel, and you do have Chaos Brand. So I gave it a 7.5. You know, not the highest damage, but also much higher than the ones that provide no raid buff, such as Prot Paladin, which I think now might possibly be the lowest DPS tank in the game in dungeons. You're kind of like more of a support spec now, which is very, very sad to see. Like, you play Crit Wings and you're still the lowest damage tank, which just feels so unfair. But yeah, Prot Pally is basically doing beans for damage right now. Prot Warrior, on the other hand, I would say does very good damage, especially on lower target counts. Your damage is extremely strong, very high, and you also have Battle Shout, so that helps. Yeah, you're basically doing higher personal damage than a Paladin, and then you also have Battle Shout, so warrior damage looking very good. Bear personal damage not looking so hot, but Mark of the Wild is very good, so we'll give them a 6. Brew is doing the highest damage, I think, of all tanks by quite a bit, especially on single target. Master of Harmony is just doing insane numbers. I would not be surprised if that saw some nerfs because that is going to be very OP in the raid. But we'll see. Right now, Brew is for sure a 10, doing insane overall, very good single target, and they have a raid buff. Definitely, definitely good. If anything, like, Brew is the tankiest tank and doing the most damage. Very strong meta contender right now, in my opinion. Blood Decay, unfortunately, has no raid buff. It has slightly higher damage than tank, or than Prot Pally, so I'll give it a 5. I weighted this category as a 0.7 since tank damage historically has not mattered that much. For instance, in this current season, Season 2, BDH is like kind of average among all the tanks, but it is by far the most like played tank. So I weighted damage contribution at a 0.7. Do keep in mind that all of these weights are very subjective and completely depend on the dungeon or like what ends up being the wall for the season. So yeah, give it a 0.7. Aggro on a big pull. So this is, if you pull like 20 mobs or like 15 mobs, how likely is it that, you know, after the opener, how likely is it that your DPS pull aggro? So I would consider this a very important factor because if you pull all the mobs and you do your rotation correctly, and then your DPS pull aggro, that's almost as bad as dying. Like, basically, if someone in your group dies to aggro because there's no counterplay because your class sucks, that is like damning for a tank. Because that basically means like you're just rolling the dice every time you pull the pack. Someone might just die if you don't crit or something. BDH I gave a 7.5. I think they usually don't run into issues, especially after the aggro fix, but you know, sometimes does happen. So we give them 7.5. Paladin basically never runs into issues like that. With Divine Toll is extremely strong. Blessed Hammer hits every mob. A lot of their damage is uncapped, which is really sad because they do no damage, but Paladin basically never has these issues. It does sometimes have them when people are popping insane cooldowns, so I give it a 9 instead of a 10. But yeah, there we are. Prot Warrior, I would say, on top of having issues with certain like things in the game, so certain tank challenges, this is Prot Warrior's biggest weakness. Even as Mountain Thane, earlier today, I just push, I'm 3 Thunder Blasts in, and suddenly my Frost Decay and Enhanced Shaman are just both dead to aggro, which is the worst possible feeling in my opinion for a tank. Hopefully they do something about this, but right now I would say this is actually Prot Warrior. It's not even survivability, that is actually Prot Warrior's biggest weakness. And it's something I ran into also on live. Floodgate being like one of the main culprits, I would just push, my opener, my rotation, demolish, and then 3 globals later, my red paladin has aggro. It's really, really sucks for a tank to suffer from this, but this is Prot Warrior's biggest weakness in my opinion. As a bear, if you have no cooldowns, it can get really rough, especially if Lunar Beam is like not quite up on pull. But if you have like the things that you normally have, then you're probably going to be fine. So I gave it an 8. Brew has absolutely no issues once everything is actually grouped, as long as you're like at your keyboard and pushing your buttons, so I gave it a 9. Blood Decay, also not really having issues if everything's actually grouped, especially as Deathbringer. Your threat, like, once things are grouped, is quite good, as is your damage. So for gathering mobs, this is like, how likely is your Moonkin or Shadow Priest to pull, or Healer even, to pull aggro while you're pulling stuff together? For VDH, after the fixes, honestly, VDH is one of the best tanks at this. The only bug currently still in the game is if someone else face pulls a pack and then you use an ability on it, it's half the time it won't generate aggro. So I give VDH an 8 because of that bug. Outside of that bug, though, it's really pretty solid as long as you have a glaive going into the pull. If you don't have a glaive, suddenly this is looking like a 5 or lower. But as long as you have a glaive going into the pull, gather as a VDH is pretty smooth, especially because you have so much mobility and long range skills like glaive. Prot Pally, we are giving a 9. Divine Toll on pull makes the gather super easy. You can also throw Avenger Shield as long as it doesn't bounce to an extra pack. You have many range skills you can use. Oops. Many range skills you can use to gather mobs. So I give Prot Pally a 9. Prot Warrior, we give a 7. I think this is another one of Warrior's weaknesses. If you don't have the Northrend speed belt, you kind of have to like run around to every pack and clap it. As Mountain Thane, this is definitely something that's a lot easier to do than as Colossus. As Colossus, I would say this is like more like a 5. But as Thane, we're giving it a 7. One thing you're missing is like a ranged ability that has long range. And you're also missing a ranged ability that can hit multiple targets. Like for instance, in Cinderbrew, this season when I was trying to do a snap, I literally had to talent Ravager just for that snap when I wasn't going to play Ravager anyway. That's a pretty big weakness for Warrior. Bear, I would say, is the best at this. You just Moonfire everything. No one is ever going to pull aggro while stuff is running in. Bear is fairly good aggro. Brew, I would say, is a 6. You don't really have a good range skill to pull mobs with. Like, you have Keg Smash, but the radius is very small. So after the Keg Smash, you're kind of reduced to, like, running through every pack and using Spinning Crane Kick, to be honest. It's kind of rough for Brew on the Gather. Once it's in, it's fine, but the Gather's rough. Blood Decay kind of has similar issues. You only have 2 charges of Blood Boil. You don't really want to use Reaper's Mark on the Gather, otherwise you lose a lot of damage. And you also don't really want to use Weapon, Dancing Rune Weapon, because you kind of need it for like defensive uptime. You can use it like as the last global of your Gather, which is something that I do a lot. But yeah, I would say Blood Decay has some issues on the Gather. 6 is probably too low, honestly. I could probably give it a 7, because you have Death Grip to help with Gather. But yeah, aggro on the Gather is a bit rough for Blood Decay. That said, I do give this a little bit of a lower weight, like a 0.5. The main reason is that if you're playing like in a meta comp with, people that they should be aware of your tank's strengths and weaknesses, like your class's strengths and weaknesses, and know like what they can and cannot do. Having bad aggro on the Gather becomes like your DPS lose 1 global instead of your DPS die. All right, so then we did a little weighted average based on all of these and multiplied them using a formula. It's not really a weighted average, it's a weighted sum, I guess, was what this is. TLDR, Prot Pally, I guess, is the winner in all this. Keep in mind that this is kind of relying on stability being an 8. So if you are not that good at Prot Pally, suddenly it looks really bad. Like let's say your Prot Pally is like your average LFG Prot Pally, and this is like a 4. Suddenly Prot Pally is not looking so good, right? But in my opinion, you do have counterplay to every situation, so I give Pally an 8 there, and I stand by it. I guess the rankings as I have them are Pally and VDH very close, but near the top. Very dependent also on how important this column is. Pally is a 10, which no other tank comes close to. I'd say Pally and BDH are pretty close near the top. Brew is, you know, it is very strong in damage and being tanky, but it is missing some things like group survivability and stopping enemies. So you're more likely to get walled by like healer checks, and your group is probably going to help. You probably have to play with a group that is really good at doing like stops. Like you definitely need to have a shaman for the, you know, knock up into AoE cap. Your rogue is going to have to push a kidney if you have a rogue, etc. But in terms of just like tanking the key, I would say Brew is actually the best tank right now. So it is middle of the pack, but that is very dependent on how useful these things actually are, right? Like if your group can take care of a survivability and stopping the enemies for you, suddenly Brew is like by far the best tank, right? Because it's the tankiest tank and it does the most damage. And then there's the 3 tanks that kind of have lagging behind. Prot Warrior has just gone through nerf after nerf after nerf on the PTR for the Colossus build, and right now I would say the state it's in is not that good. Damage contribution is nice, but like certain things just make it so hard for Warrior to live, and it really feels like a burden a little bit sometimes. One thing I think that can help a Prot Warrior survive a lot is having a Paladin in the group, like a Red Paladin or even a Holy Paladin. Having like the Bop AoE taunt combo is extremely strong at dropping certain debuffs, and having 1 minute attack as an external is also really nice. So I would say if you have a Red Paladin in the group, suddenly Warrior is a lot more playable. But just randomly plugging on it is gonna feel really rough in my opinion. Fair, you know, it is somewhat tanky, but in my opinion, it is just simply worse than Brew at like the things that Brew is good at. It's not as tanky, it does less damage, and you know, if you're gonna be useless for other things, you might as well be tanky and do damage, right? That's what a Brew does. Blood DK, I would say, is, you know, as always, the king of keys that are like 1 to 2 or 3 levels below what you should be doing or what is possible. But once you get to the highest keys, it does, in my opinion, run into survivability walls before other tanks do. So that's going to be the main issue with Blood DK. So that's going to be it for the video. Thank you for watching. And as always, do remember, all of this was extremely subjective based on my personal experience. No one knows how important these weights are going to be, not even me. And also, the only thing that you can do wrong right now, in my opinion, if you want to be a meta chaser, is pick a tank. You should be, in my opinion, like picking a tank before the season even starts is a strong mistake. You should be just be rage. Like you can pick one, you know, that you're going to enjoy and for the start of the season, but don't like be hard committed to it. Be ready to reroll halfway through as balance changes come or a meta develops. Same goes for DPS and healers. Anyway, thank y'all for watching. Peace out.